From MPB Think Radio, this is the Sit Down with Russ Latino, where we explore the ideas and people that are shaping Mississippi's future. Busy day around the state of Mississippi. Beautiful weather all of a sudden. All the fun stuff that's going on. We're joined live today by House Speaker Jason White. Welcome to the Sit Down.
Good to be with you, Russ.
Appreciate you coming in.
It is a beautiful spring day, and lots of the members, both House and Senate, have their kids here who are out on spring break. So this week always kind of livens up around the Capitol a little bit, just with all that going on.
That's pretty cool to come and see mom and dad do what they do.
Yeah, the spouses get to, they come and bring the kids, and it livens us up a little bit, and it's not so mundane. And this is that part of the session where lots of stuff is dying, and so it's good to have that fresh perspective from the kids there.
Well, and at some level, to your point, it's like you get to the end of session and people get a little cross with each other. They kind of forget their humanity a little bit because there are some real fights and over-important stuff going on.
That's right.
And then you see family members and you're like, all right, old Joe's not that bad.
Yeah, puts a human element back to it that sometimes we lose sight of.
I will say, you gave some closing remarks a few days ago, and you might know the exact day, but I was really impressed with the conversation around the unity that is occurring in the House of Representatives, that you guys really have been able to, in a lot of ways, transcend some of the obvious divides between Republicans and Democrats, white legislators and black legislators. Talk a little bit about kind of what motivated that thought process.
Well, Bryant Clark lost his dad a week ago now, and we buried him yesterday. And that is a show in and of itself sometime for somebody to come here and talk about him being the first black legislator elected since Reconstruction. So Brian had been out all week dealing with his dad's death, and we were having a bunch of repealer-type legislation votes, and they were all going to the board 119 to nothing. And it just made me – I kept seeing that 119, and normally that's 122. And so I thought, well, we're missing three people. We've had Charles Young, a Democrat from Meridian, that passed away this fall, and then or right as session was starting, and then Andy Stepp back in the fall, a Republican from Calhoun County. So, I thought maybe we were kind of going through the motions just a little bit there, and we certainly wish those two guys were with us. Bryant certainly wished he was there voting instead of dealing with his dad's death. And it was just maybe a quick reminder to them that how fleeting all this is and how privileged we are to get to sit there and vote and, listen to what political pundits have to say, absorb all that, absorb the lobbyists, absorb your constituents, all of that stuff. But those men and women are actually the ones that get to come in there and actually vote and have the power, if you will, and just it's just that awesome responsibility. And I was trying to remind them that don't take that for granted, the fact that you're getting to sit here and do this and try to make a difference. And regardless of what people say, most of our members in the House and in the Senate too, you hear that about folks saying, oh, they're voting this or they're carrying this water, doing this for this reason. Most individuals there really are trying to do what they think is right. Now, we have great and, heated debate on what is right a lot of days, but they come from a place of this is what my constituents sent me here to do, and this is the banner I'm going to carry, and this is important to me and my people, and they go down swinging, on their issues. But it was just I was trying to remind them of the fact that while it is hard, we're privileged to get to be there and do that.
I think sometimes, too, we forget that the legislature, any legislative body, is supposed to be a deliberative body, right? They're supposed to be hard debates and hard conversations and disagreement. It's not supposed to be easy necessarily.
That's correct. That's right.
And really, that dates back to our founding, the thought process of, hey, look, we don't want government to be superimposing upon people. And because of that, we're going to create this system of checks and balances. And obviously, we see that play out with you guys.
You see it play out. And sometimes I get frustrated with my Senate counterparts because to us it seems so obvious and easy, the answer. But they're on that other end of the building for a reason, and they label themselves the more deliberative body, and that's fine. Maybe they are. But the system usually works. If you stay at it and work hard on the issues that are important to you, usually the end result is something probably about where we ought to land, like this tax debate that continues to rage. They don't want to go as fast and as far as I do and my House Republican caucus wants to. But that's not a bad thing. I think the legislation, if we get somewhere this session, I think it'll be a better result because lots of different hands and eyes, have touched it and looked at it, and that's the process. It should be hard. It should be.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that about the differences in the Senate and the House. I had a conversation with somebody this past week, and their observation was, well, the House is more conservative than the Senate. And I said, maybe on some things, right? And you might like that framing too.
Right.
But I said, really, what I see as a difference is the House is more willing to be aggressive, and the Senate has more of a cautious approach. And I do think there's some value in those two things. Like if you looked at the 2022 tax reform, that was the same setup, right? The House was much more aggressive. The Senate was much more laid back, way more laid back, right?
Right.
I think their initial plan was like a $50 million a year plan. But then the end result was that you got to a 4% flat tax that provides the foundation for the conversation you're having now.
Exactly.
Help me understand the setup of the conversation that's happening now.
The setup of the conversation for us, and when I say us, I mean the House. We started this time last year talking about it. We were still fresh off of the 2022 tax cuts, and as you know, we still have one more year to absorb those. So we thought last year was a little bit premature as far as session. First year out of the gate, we wouldn't go there. Let's see where we are and let the economy and everything else settle from all the COVID and everything of that. But we started immediately when session was over last year in 2024, late in the spring, early summer, and started working on it. We formed a select committee. I put some of my smartest folks or folks that had indicated they wanted to be involved in that debate and that exploration, if you will, through the summer and fall. So we spent a lot of time on it. But from the very beginning, our goal was, can we get to zero? And if we can, how can we do that? It wasn't, can we cut some more tax? It was a stated public goal, and we didn't hide the ball on that. Our goal was total elimination. And that is tricky to do. No state has ever actually done it that had an income tax. Now, there's several that don't have one, but they never had one,
right, or
a very small one. We relied on a large portion of our state budget for personal income tax. So to move away from that, whatever you do, I tell folks this all the time about around the Capitol. When you start moving people's cheese around with agencies or different department heads, all the different things are the way we've always done it. Folks don't like that. So we were touching so many facets of state revenue and the way we gather it, and to some extent the way we spend it, but mainly the way we gather it, and move away from income tax and more toward consumption. We spent a lot of time on that. And then so we resented a little bit when we came out with our bill in January. A lot of folks were critiquing it, saying that's too fast. They're going too fast. This is the third week of the session. But we've been working on it for 9 months. To us, it was a long, slugfest to get to that. And
at some level, really, I hear what you're saying about working on it for 9 months, but really, this conversation started in 2016.
It did. It started in 2016, and the increments and the things that happened to push it along. And that's probably the way to do it. That was, we didn't get here in 10 years. We might not can get out of here in 10 years. But now we are 8-9 years down the road from those conversations that were centered around. Now, some folks say, well, state government has grown. The budget has grown. There's no denying it has over the last few years. Part of that is inflation. And whether anybody wants to admit it or not, that is part of it. Part of it was the new funding formula and that historic teacher pay raise that got us out of last place in the way we pay our teachers. And while I think we've proven to some large extent that money does not equal test scores and results, and folks even question some of our accountability standards and the way we look at that, I think that's a coming conversation going forward, in the coming sessions. So some of those things we needed to do. We needed to do some things at Department of Mental Health and Child Protective Services, and that unfortunately costs money, getting sued by the feds in those places. So we had to do some things there. But because we have been trying to hold budgets down where we could, it freed up some money to spend some money on things like that. Having said that, we're at a place now where last year everybody was funded, and nobody was cut, and we feel like now going forward we're in a much better place to address that. The Joint Legislative Budget Committee's recommendations for a budget are the exact ones now that our House appropriators have passed this session. The budget only grows 0.31%, less than 0.5% this year over last year. So we are more than living within our means. And a lot of folks get me, whether it's at the grocery store or church or wherever, like, why do y'all keep talking about tax cuts? Well, because we continue to take in almost a 10% surplus of what we're spending. Our budget this year that the House will approve, and we've been clear with the Senate whether we're going to stick to those numbers on the House side, is less than $7.1 billion. That's within $30 million of where we were last year. And we're going to take in 7.7, maybe 7.8. So you're still running a 10% surplus that already includes fully funding the rainy day fund at 10%. And we've got a couple $2 billion in the bank. So we're borrowed money again.
We're talking with House Speaker Jason White about the tax reform. We're going to take a brief break and then come back and we'll continue the conversation, because I think it's good for the people of Mississippi to understand what's being debated on this. Obviously, big transformative policy. We'll be right back.
You don't want to miss the next Mississippi Antique Showcase coming to Oxford, Mississippi, May 2nd and 3rd.
For a $100 donation, you can get a showcase ticket, complimentary food, cocktails, and an on-site appraisal, or a chance to be on the show. Or for $60, you can just come and be part of the party. Call 1-844-874-6874, visit mpbonline.org, or scan the QR code on your screen.
We can't wait to see you in Oxford for the next Mississippi Antique Showcase.
Hello, I'm Desiree Frazier, host of the award-winning news program, Mississippi Edition. We bring you conversations about the latest news from across the Magnolia State. Whether it's politics, healthcare, or education, you'll hear in-depth discussions on issues that matter to you. So join us each weekday morning at 8:30 on MPB Think Radio, or download the podcast, listen through the app, and online.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bobby Rush. As a blues man, I love Mississippi Public Broadcasting. If you support Mississippi music and their local programming, donate now, right now, and become a member today, not tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Doesn't matter how big or small, but we prefer big. Thank you very much.
From MPB Think Radio, this is the Sit Down with Russ Latino. We're joined today by House Speaker Jason White, talking a little bit about the big tax reform conversation that's going on. Would you agree that that's the largest conversation this session?
It is the largest conversation, for sure it is. And I'll give my people credit in the House. They wanted it to be. They wanted it to be our House Bill 1. They wanted it to be our priority. Last year, it was getting rid of MAP and adopting a new student funding formula for K-12 public education that we could actually understand and hit the target. And I learned valuable lessons last year about, at some point you've kind of got to pivot and focus and pick. If you're gonna move something big policy wise, you kind of got to put everything behind it. You can't have a whole bunch of different irons in the fire. You'll end up with nothing. And so this year, we tag that as our thing. Now, we spent a whole bunch of time on education separate from that, and a little bit on healthcare this year in the CON space and allowing folks to practice to their full education. And I'm proud of the advancements in the House on that. And I'd love to talk about that if we get the chance today. But our main focus was going to be on tax reform, and we were going to put all of our, political capital,
the juice,
all the juice towards that. And my Republican caucus in the House has stuck with that goal, and that makes my job a little bit easier, maybe as the tip of the spear when you look back and everybody's still behind you saying, go, go, go. That makes it much easier for me to communicate with the other end of the building and with the governor's office about when I say where we are, where the House is. Makes my job a lot easier.
You know, and I think there's some important context for this conversation. Not only has this been going on since 2016 and the legislature has been making progress, but you alluded to the fact that there are 9 other states that don't operate with an income tax. If you look at those, because a lot of people have the question, it's like, oh, well, can anybody do this? And the answer is, well, Texas and Tennessee and Florida do it pretty well, right?
They do.
Where you see population growth that's gangbusters, economic growth that's gangbusters. Candidly, the state coffers increase at a faster pace in terms of revenue to the state because their economy is growing so fast. And so the answer is it can be done. The other part of this, I think that's important, if you look at what has happened with tax revenue over the last 10 years in Mississippi, you guys have cut taxes over and over again, right?
And we've continued.
And you've continued to go up. You went from like 7-something billion and collected to like close to 11 billion collected. Now, I know not all of that ends up in the general fund that you got control over, but that's incredible that we've had that kind of growth even as taxes have been being cut. So there is some merit to this idea that when you return to people what they've earned, when you allow workers to keep what they've earned, that they invested in the economy in a way that candidly is better than government.
No doubt. I've been in the room when government's spending it. And Russ, you don't want to be in that room. It would drive you crazy. Folks spend their money much better than we do as a government and as politicians. And I tell people that in this debate about infrastructure funding. I've been in the room when politicians are deciding which roads get paved, and that's not the way to do it. We need a structured system with their 3-year plan at MDOT. There are better ways to do it than us having a bunch of extra money and then saying, okay, we got this extra money. What are we going to do with it? And then we just start spending on stuff. And that's not a pretty sight, and it usually does not work out for the taxpayer.
Well, and you mentioned this earlier, too, is like you're going to bring in $7.7 billion, give or take, this year. You guys have been operating the last couple of years close to $7 billion in terms of what you're spending. But there was an increase from 2019 till recent times. I mean, we went from about $5.7 billion to $7 billion. And the risk, if you're a taxpayer looking at, well, you're sitting on all this extra money that candidly is my money, is that eventually the legislature finds creative ways to also spend that surplus.
They do. And that's our point is I've heard some other statewide not involved in day-to-day legislating say, well, why don't you get a handle on spending before you talk about cutting taxes? I would just tell you, to some extent, to force legislators and appropriators to have tough conversations, tax cuts is part of what helps force that. And I know you shouldn't back into it. I'm not saying wreck the economy and then let's figure out what we've got to do to fund it. But I'm saying the easy thing to do when folks are wanting this, or this program needs expanded, or these kids are being slighted here, they need more money, or whatever the thing is, if there's money laying around, the easy answer is just here's 10 million and here's 5 million. And before you know it, that's 100 million. Like it just keeps adding up. We had some very good legislation this year, for instance, that would help our National Guard recruit better. Some legislation that would help our local fire and police departments recruit better. But they came with huge price tags. And is that worthy of the $30 or $40 million spend that's going to now be coming every year in those things? Let's weigh those out. Here we are, we're growing the budget again. Those are worthy pieces of legislation. But because of the spend involved, they don't get a full vetting sometimes because that money's just laying over there that could be used for it. Whereas if you've got to make it work, and my first few years in the legislature, we were cutting budgets. We exhausted the rainy day fund the first 2 years I was in the legislature, trying to make budgets. The governor was ordering cuts, those kind of things. So I've been around when it's that way. It forces legislators to get in the room and do what businesses do, which is, okay, what part of this do we really need?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And those conversations don't happen with those huge surpluses laying around. They should, but they don't.
Well, and I'll give you guys credit for something that I don't think people recognize, which is the legislature has been aggressively paying down state debt as well.
Yep.
And so when you think about it from a fiscal management standpoint, I think there would be some people who would look at the conversation around income tax elimination and say, that feels reckless. But when you combine it with, hey, this is a 8-9 year process, and then the phase-in is going to be a much longer process, and with the reality that the legislature has been paying down debt, I think you've cleared $1 billion in debt, or will have this year.
$1 billion just in the last 3. And again, another key to that is not only are we paying it down, we're not also hitting the credit card for something. Like we were making our debt payments in past years, but we were also basically hitting it at the end of session for the amount we just paid off almost. We weren't ever moving that total number down. And now this will be the 3rd, 4th year in a row that we won't borrow, and we will continue to meet all of those obligations in a way that is like really systematically buying it down.
So when we come back from break, I want to talk about education. But before we go to break, what's the prognosis on tax reform? Do you feel like there's a good opportunity here?
I tend to be the positive glass half full guy around the cap, I think. And I'm still confident we're going to get something done. We've had very fruitful conversations with the Senate the last few days. Again, they don't want to go as fast as we do. That's fair. But we want total elimination to be there, not only be the publicly stated goal of our conversations, but that be the end result. And the governor, I've been on issues where he was on the other side and it was not fun. It's a lot more fun when he's on your side because he is skilled at assessing public policy, assessing public perception of it, and getting it in a position where folks can understand it and get on board. And he's a numbers guy. And so we are comfortable. It makes us more comfortable, the fact that the governor has said, while he would change a few things in House Bill 1, if we put it on his desk, he would sign it. And so we want the Senate to take House Bill 1, make their changes to it, and let's find that path to total elimination that the governor can and will sign. And I'm saying we're not that far off. Some issues exist about PERS, about setting aside some money. As I mentioned, we've got close to a couple of $1 billion in the bank account. Should we set aside some money specifically to handle any potential shortfalls that might occur, a crisis, something happen? Should the legislation involve triggers? Like some conversation has started now in the last 72 hours. Should those cuts in out years, which are hard to predict, admittedly so, should they include triggers? All right, if the answer is yes, all right, now there's 15,
what is the trigger?
There's 15 different kinds of triggers,
sure.
And you could probably come up with one here just as quick as some of my folks. You know what I'm saying? And the question is, let's don't have it in such a way that a future legislature can just manipulate it to not hit it or hit it. Let's have it be a real thing. And sometimes that means people have to put their political pen down for a minute and figure out what is right.
Yeah, I know there's always been some conversation around something like a population plus inflation trigger, which allows you to adjust for new people coming in and then obviously to adjust for inflation. Sometimes, like Colorado has Tabor, which is not to eliminate the income tax, but it is to limit the amount the government spends. And sometimes you just said, hey, the spending growth range is going to be 2.5, 3, whatever the number is, right? So that at some level, I think a lot of policy people that I've worked with on national policy would say triggers are a good idea.
Yeah.
But you're right, the secret's in the sauce. What exactly is it going to look like? Is it too limiting? Is it too free? All that stuff will affect whether or not it makes sense and whether or not the policy actually gets implemented long run.
That's right. That's right. And that's where we are. We've talked about, historically, we've never not grown 3%. So is that going to be the floor? You have to grow 3%. What about spending? Are you growing spending? And if so, at how much? At what point? And so is that going to be part of the equation? I think the governor would prefer that it not, because maybe he thinks past legislators hadn't shown an ability to hold the spend down. So you could artificially let it get within the delta that would keep you from a cut in out years. So we've got to figure out exactly what that looks like. And that's something that we are certainly open to. We're certainly open to phasing in some of our tax increases that centered around gas tax and or sales tax. Those things, cutting the grocery tax is not as important to me as cutting the personal income tax, but it's extremely important to my Senate colleagues. And so we're trying to get there on that as well.
Yeah, and look, I think it's an extremely popular policy, the idea of reducing the sales tax on groceries. I would say if you were looking at it as a student of economics, which is the way that my brain naturally looks at these things, it feels a little gimmicky, may be too strong of a word. It doesn't have the same natural impact of reducing the rate on work.
Well, I will tell you, the lieutenant governor, when we were having this sort of conversation, he's like, well, the grocery tax, it polls the highest of any. And I said, well, why don't you poll car tags and see where that hits? Like, it's easy to send something out that folks will absolutely say 100%, you got to get rid of that.
Sure. And I did a calculation at one point. It was like if you eliminate the income tax on somebody with $75,000 of taxable income versus cutting the grocery tax in half, you'd have to be spending like $5,000 a month on groceries.
That's right.
Which, by the way, no one does.
No one does. That's exactly right.
In order for it to be equal. And so just in terms of real impact on money in our system, being able to invest in families and businesses, there's no comparison between those two things.
And the other kind of red herring in that argument is a lot of folks, when they go to the grocery store, they're thinking about their weekly spend there. Well, about half of that stuff they buy is not technically groceries anyway.
Sure.
It's going to qualify for some sort of break there. So it's, again, it's all in the details.
You got the policy nerd in me going. I'm sorry. We're going to take a brief break right here on the Sit Down with Russ Latino. We're talking with House Speaker Jason White. We'll be right back.
The Measuring Show.
Since 1970, MPB has been enriching the lives of Mississippians.
Everything we do gives us the chance to grow and learn.
With your support, we are always there whenever and wherever you need us. Together through the years, together in the future. Please consider making a donation at mpbfoundation.org. MPB, your stories, our mission.
You don't want to miss the next Mississippi Antique Showcase coming to Oxford, Mississippi, May 2nd and 3rd.
For a $100 donation, you can get a showcase ticket, complimentary food, cocktails, and an on-site appraisal, or a chance to be on the show. Or for $60, you can just come and be part of the party. Call 1-844-874-6874, visit mpbonline.org, or scan the QR code on your screen.
We can't wait to see you in Oxford for the next Mississippi Antique Showcase.
Both seasons of the 10-Minute Timeout are now available on a variety of podcasting apps. The mini podcast can be binged in a day and is perfect for those that just want a quick listen. Join me, Lacey Alexander, as I sit down with special guests, revisit major moments, and give a platform to the athletes and sports that shape Mississippi. Head over to mpbonline.org to give it a try.
From MPB Think Radio, this is the Sit Down with Russ Latino. We are talking today with House Speaker Jason White. We were talking about tax reform. Obviously, that's a big issue. It's one that's occupied a lot of time and space in this legislative session. And, you know, it sounds like maybe there's some optimism in that direction. You mentioned earlier the focus that you had last year around the education funding formula. I think people need to understand that between the teacher pay raise and the education funding formula, K-12 education is somewhere between $700 and $800 million more in funding than what it had been prior to those pieces of legislation, and a couple of other pieces as well. That's a huge investment in education.
It's a huge investment. But what I thought it did, Russ, is I thought it would buy us, and when I say us, the mean old Republicans, I thought it would buy us some credibility with the public education crowd who, for whatever reason, seems to have, we've always been, since my time in the legislature, my very first session in 2012, we were talking about charter schools. And Republicans had just taken over, and this sort of, you know, a line got drawn, and the Republicans were over here, and you couldn't be a public ed supporter and be a Republican, support the Republican agenda. And in practice, that is not the case. Most people, Republican, Democrat, black, white, Delta, Hills, Pine Belt, Gulf Coast, prefer their local public school that is in their community. It's where most parents went to school. It's where they want their kids to have that same experience that they remember. However, public schools may have changed in the last 30 years, but my point is they want that for their kids. I think that will always be the number one source of K-12 education in our state. But I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that fits everybody. And parents and taxpayers now more than ever are driving the conversation around all sorts of social issues. And then all of a sudden education comes into this. And I don't know why we check parents' authority on that subject at the door when it comes to public education. Because after all, we've taxed them and taken their money to fund this public school. Why do they not have a say in how that works for their kids? And that idea is catching on and catching on and catching on. But the big investments in our teacher pay raises and our funding formulas, I thought we were putting our money where our mouth was, and it would buy us some credibility with the education crowd to talk about these other things. And the House this year, we passed half a dozen bills that we called education reform. Now, a lot of people started calling it school choice because we had a portability bill in there for public-to-public transfers, as well as public to anywhere you could get to accept you, and the state portion of per pupil funding follow that child in DNF districts. Those were very small baby steps compared to what states even are just around us, much less, all across the country, have done in the space surrounding universal choice. And I don't understand why it has to be the idea of supporting public schools should not be exclusive from giving parents some ability there.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's crazy to me.
It's a false choice that seems to be presented, and I think we're smarter than that. I think we're better than that, and I think parents and taxpayers are starting to demand it. And I think that's coming with a second Trump administration who's now made it a stated public goal. Our state lined up very well and voted overwhelmingly for President Trump and his agenda. I don't know how we check that at the door on this issue.
Yeah, I watched the debate on the Tim Tebow bill, and obviously that bill didn't get brought up in the Senate. It passed out of the House pretty overwhelmingly, was my recollection, maybe close to 100 votes.
It did.
And really all that bill did was to say that if you're a homeschool kid, you get to participate in extracurricular activities in the public school where you live, right? And I had a lot of people say, well, why should these homeschool kids be able to because their parents pay the same taxes.
That's exactly right.
They pay the property taxes that fund the school. They pay the sales and income taxes, right now at least, that fund the state government that help to fund the schools. And so at some level, why shouldn't they be allowed to participate in something that they are funding?
And that's what I'm saying. The argument escapes me. I don't understand that other side of it. If I had a good product at the local public school, I would want to expose it to as many people as I could, including a homeschool family who might show up to play golf or tennis or baseball or football, whatever sport they come to play, and say, you know what? I actually like my teammates. Mom, I think I want to go to school here, and let's look into the curriculum and see what they're doing. I don't know how it's a bad thing for those kids to be exposed to that. Anyway, we thought that was, again, a small baby step. Most other states have done it. I think we missed a great opportunity there. I was proud of some of my House Democrats who have traditionally not been willing to go there actually vote for it because they saw the value in it, and actually stop the rhetoric for a minute and think about it and think it through. And when they did, we found 15 or 20 bipartisan votes for it.
And even on the public-to-public transfer bill that you called the portability bill, right? Obviously that passed to the House, wasn't taken up in the Senate. I know Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann came on this show back in December and said that was something that he actually favored. It's important for people to understand that policy is not really a new policy.
It's not.
Right? So the state already allows public-to-public transfer.
We allow it, and it happens a lot. I would just tell you there's probably a little bit more cherry picking and choosing. But you've got to get your local school board to release you to attend another public school. So I hear folks saying they get dramatic and say they hold them hostage and don't let them go. That's basically true. I encountered that personally with our youngest daughter had a speech impediment. She was going to go to Magnolia Speech School here in Jackson for a couple of years to get started. Our local school district would not release her, even with that IP, to go to Magnolia Speech School. They said, nope. We'll furnish you a therapist here or there. You can come to Holmes County Schools and make this work. So I had experienced not being released from a local school board. So I had some experience there, not they're not doing what most other school districts do, which is say, no, we've provided an education, we've got it, there's no need for us to release you because of the money. But kids get released all the time, just not, it's on a case-by-case basis if everything lines up just right and somebody knows the right school board or the right administrator and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so right now then you need both the school that's going to accept the kid that the kid wants to attend and the school the kid wants to leave to say yes. And all your bill really would have done was to create a process that eliminated the veto power of the school the kid was leaving.
You still had to find a home that was willing to take you. You still had to find another public school that was willing to take you before. And then even then, only the state portion of the spend followed the child. None of the local taxes left the local school district. They stayed there. But the state's portion of a per pupil spending would follow that child. And we set up an account and we were going to put $5 million in it and just first come, first served until that got exhausted. We'd find out if people want to use this or not. And nobody was holding that out as that was going to fix all that ails public education when it comes to choice for parents who want something different for their child. But again, it was a small baby step. And I think it shows how far we are in this public education debate from real reform when we couldn't even get that out of the Senate, which we thought was a baby step.
Yeah, but it also shows the disconnect, I think, between what the public says they want and a very small but concentrated constituency, right? So the public overwhelmingly says that they like what Louisiana and Arkansas and Tennessee and Alabama have done.
We've polled it. We've spent a lot of money polling it right here in Mississippi.
Over 70%, right?
Yep.
And there are not very many over 70% issues in the state.
That's correct.
So parents want the ability to decide what is in the best interest of their child because parents know what is in the best interest of their children. It strikes me, though, that what is happening is that very small concentrated constituency has certain members of the legislature in fear.
They do.
And the crazy thing is that some of those fears are entirely unfounded. I'll give you an example and maybe get you to respond. We saw, where I live, push cards that were put out against the public-to-public transfer that said that allowing a kid to transfer into the school system my children attend would destroy property values and the culture of our schools. I got to tell you, as somebody who is a student of history, has followed the sort of rhetoric that happened around segregation, I'm not saying that's what they meant, but it's really unfortunate language. It's also just not true, right? I mean,
it's not true, and it's extremely unfortunate language, and it doesn't get us where we need to be. Like, as we have talked about full choice and had those debates both internally around the coffee pot and in our caucus meetings and even some on the House floor, there's no denying our very messy, complicated, and yes, sometimes ugly past when it came to public integration of our public schools. That's part of Mississippi's history. Nobody's denying it. I'm not denying it. I'm not denying why private schools sprang up in our state. It was a result of integration. But that's 50 years ago. We have come so far since then. I'm not saying everything's perfect, but what I'm saying is I think it should be more about what is best for the child. And for some reason, in all the debates that talk about budgets, teacher salaries, what it costs to bus somebody, nobody ever says, well, what about the kids? What is best for that kid? Madison County has excellent public schools. There's no question about that, specifically in the southern end of the county, but all along. And certainly with what's going on with Amazon now, there's going to be an influx of money. And
the Cannon Public School System is about to be the richest school system in the state of Mississippi.
That's right. Mississippi State and Ole Miss will be very jealous of the money that's pouring into that school district. I think the conversation, if we could just step back and keep it about the kids and the parents, to me that goes further than some of these other reasons, if you will. Choice won't fix where we've got some traditionally failing public schools. But it's one more, if it gets 10 kids out of there or it causes that public school to up their game, and I hear people say, oh, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. What I know is those traditional failing schools have stayed that way, and it happens and it happens and it happens and it happens. And I hear them talk about, well, there's no accountability in these private schools. Yeah, it is. Parents will pull them out and take them somewhere else.
Sure.
There's real accountability, the same that the grocery store has or a movie theater or a car dealer or what, If you told people in this state you were going to go to Ole Miss if you lived in the northern Supreme Court district, Mississippi State in the Central District or Southern Miss in the Southern District. If you told people that, we would have a riot on our hands.
Yeah, and by the way, nobody opposes Pell Grants either, right?
That's right.
So the federal government funds Pell Grants to allow kids of low income to be able to go to college wherever they want.
That's right.
A recognition that people should be able to make these choices for themselves. You know, it strikes me that fundamentally this is a question about who do we trust to make decisions. Do we trust families to make decisions about what is right for them, or do we trust government to make decisions on behalf of families? And I think a conservative viewpoint, at least, would be that we should empower families, give agency to families to make those decisions, and candidly, that will lead to better accountability.
It does in everything else. In every other facet of our society, it does. We're fooling ourselves to think it wouldn't there. Now, certainly, I hear public schools advocates sometimes say, yeah, but we have to take them all. We have to take everyone. We even have to take the low-performing student or this one that drags our scores. Yeah, that's why you're funded by the government. Like, that's why taxpayer money flows in there. There is some minimum level of duty we feel we owe to all of our citizens to educate them. They should be striving hard. I just say the accountability is already there in the private sector side of it, and we overcomplicate it by all these red herring arguments that really parents aren't that caught up in. We trust them to feed them, clothe them, decide what sort, if any, of religious upbringing they will have. I don't know how all of a sudden we pull that back when it comes to their education, which probably maybe is the most important.
It's time for another break. We're talking with House Speaker Jason Wright right here on The Sit Down with Russ Latino. You're listening to MPB Think Radio. We'll be back for our last segment.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bobby Rush. As a blues man, I love Mississippi Public Broadcasting. If you support Mississippi music and their local programming, donate now, right now, and become a member today, not tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Doesn't matter how big or small, but we prefer big. Thank you very much.
You don't want to miss the next Mississippi Antique Showcase coming to Oxford, Mississippi, May 2nd and 3rd.
For a $100 donation, you can get a showcase ticket, complimentary food, cocktails, and an on-site appraisal, or a chance to be on the show. Or for $60, you can just come and be part of the party. Call 1-844-874-6874, visit mpbonline.org, or scan the QR code on your screen.
We can't wait to see you in Oxford for the next Mississippi Antique Showcase.
The Measuring Show.
Since 1970, MPB has been enriching the lives of Mississippians.
Everything we do gives us the chance to grow and learn.
With your support, we are always there whenever and wherever you need us. Together through the years, together in the future. Please consider making a donation at mpbfoundation.org. MPB, your stories, our mission.
You're listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio, talking today with House Speaker Jason White. Good conversation about tax reform, about some of the education bills and kind of the struggle on some of those, I think. You know, I just took a closing thought around education because I do want to get your thoughts on healthcare. It strikes me that the goal of education is to prepare a kid for life. And if everybody can agree that's the common goal, then the question becomes, how do we best prepare a kid for life? And oh, by the way, are they all the same, right? So that it doesn't have to be pitting public school against private school or charter schools or whatever, but a recognition that different kids learn differently. They're going to be in a position to succeed based on their environment being the right environment. Does that make sense?
And we already know the answer to that last question you posed. All kids are different. Certainly, public schools meet the vast majority of our kids' needs in Mississippi, but it doesn't mean there can't be other ways that are good and valid and have their place and have value there. I tell people I went to private schools for 6 years. I went to public schools for 6 years of my 12 years so maybe I'm one of the experiments. I can tell you the good and bad in both of them, and depending on where you were and what you were doing and that sort of thing. And they all have their place. But again, we're talking about parents, and parents should have that say. Jansen Owen, one of my Republican representatives from Pearl River County, he's been very engaged on the education front. That's one of his passions in his time in the legislature. He put it well in a tweet earlier this week or maybe over the weekend about those ideas are not mutually exclusive about supporting public schools and wanting what's best for them and the teachers there, and also supporting parents. There's a balance there, and we need to find it. And I would just finally say on that issue, we're going to keep plugging away at that. It's not going away. Parents are demanding more and not less when it comes to their kids' education. and they're willing to think outside the box. And that causes lawmakers to start doing the same thing. And with that, I think, though it's tough sledding, it's worthy, and I think you'll see that a continuation of that. And certainly the House is going to continue to focus on that and push a little bit.
So you guys today have a deadline to move through the floor, bill sent over by the Senate, and the Senate has the same deadline to move bill sent over by the House. I think, some people would say today's are normally sort of garbage days, and that you're left with what's left.
Right.
You mentioned, though, an important priority around health care and some of the things that the legislature or that the House specifically is focused on this session with con laws, and I think also with scope of practice. Talk a little bit about why those two things are important to you and then maybe where those things stand.
The House had bills on both of those issues. And I learned real quick, I thought those, when I first got in the legislature, my wife is a nurse practitioner and involved in healthcare and has been her entire career. And so I was on the periphery of that, just by that being, her vocation and what she did, running a family healthcare clinic and that sort of thing. And a rural setting where we are in central Mississippi and where we live and raise our kids. And so that was the exposure I had. So in my time in the legislature from the very beginning, I think my freshman year, I was the only person that put Medicaid as their top committee choice. And Speaker Gunn called me and he goes, "Why do you want to be on this committee?" My wife says it could use a lot of work. But anyway, from the very beginning, I wondered about why we hold back. What if you and a group of guys, decided, what if you had a doctor friend who had a great idea to put a facility in an area and try to provide the best service that could be provided, and people would be drawn to that. He would have to go and apply to the Department of Health and figure out, is there anybody else there? How many are there? Is it going to take business away from them? If you did that on any other front in any other sector, folks would come unglued about it. If I just said, I don't want any lawyers moving into Kosciuszko, they might get part of my practice, I would like that as a sitting lawyer who has my shingle out. And I get the part about, generational investment in some of this technology and those type of things. Maybe folks wouldn't invest in a rural community if they thought another one could come in and upend them in a day, and there wouldn't be enough business to support both. And it's kind of like changing our tax structure. We didn't get in this overnight. We won't get out of it overnight. And so we thought this CON bill was a good first step. It allowed folks, like, for instance, one of the things was in dialysis care. That is tamped down and very tightly controlled in our state. We thought that was a good place to start. But we gave the folks that do have those certificate of needs now, we gave them 4 years to phase out and recoup whatever investments there before we opened it up. For instance, that's a for instance. We thought that was a baby step. And man, it was met with fierce opposition from the interest.
Well, and I think some people just see it as the camel's nose, right? It's that kind of argument that if we allow some, we're eventually going to have to allow for more freedom. But at some level, look, the state of Mississippi's got to decide, do we want people to have access to care? Because if we want people to have access to care, a big part of that conversation is supply, right? And if you're limiting the potential supply of care, you're limiting the ability of people to go and see a doctor or a nurse practitioner.
And specifically, we already know we have an extreme doctor shortage. And I'm doing my part. My oldest child is in her first year of medical school. So I tell everybody I'm not against docs. I'm for them. I hope there's, thriving opportunity for her when she gets out of medical school. But there's no denying we have this shortage. Why in the world would we limit a nurse practitioner if he or she was willing to open up a clinic anywhere in our state, but especially in underserved places where there is no primary health care provider? Why in the world would we say, you can do it, but you're going to be under a collaboration agreement with an MD who, by the way, I think the public perception is that doctor is there and looking over the shoulder of that nurse practitioner, and that is not what is happening. They audit 10% of their charts once a month after the fact, way after.
Sure.
If you got care that wasn't great, that's over and done with, and supposedly this is to prevent that. And I'm not upset at my docs about it. I just think it's time we move forward. Other states have, and we don't have to be last in everything. We could make some steps here, and we just, I was proud of the effort in the House to put that rhetoric aside and do what we thought was best, and it met a slow and quiet death in the Senate. So we'll continue to work on that for sure.
Well, and I mean, those problems aren't going away, right? We've got the worst access to physicians in the country right now. And that problem's getting worse because most of them are very close to retirement, or a good portion's very close to retirement. We should do this for another hour, but apparently the music is playing, which means it's time for me to be quiet. House Speaker Jason White, thank you for being here on the sit down right here on Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Germaine Flood in the booth. Joseph Hall back here producing today. Southern Remedy coming up next at 11, and we'll be back next Wednesday right here at 10 a.m. on the sit down on MPB Think Radio.